Hello. In this video, we are going to talk about how can you, as a user of EaRL, how can you further develop or modify its functionalities and sharing those with the rest of the community. So first of all, we need to clarify that EaRL is meant to be an open source software under the GPL license. This means that anybody can use the code and modify it as long as it will be shared with other users eventually. So this is actually highly encouraged that everybody who uses EaRL do this at some point. And actually, by doing this, if a number of users start getting familiar with the code and starting modifying it and doing changes to the functionalities of EaRL, then eventually the software can grow in its capabilities and its features, which can help the entire community, of course. So EaRL is developed fully in the MATLAB environment. So the source code is essentially a combination of graphical user interface files and M files or MATLAB functions. And actually going online to the EaRL repository on github.com, we mentioned, like, as a regular user you will need to download the installation executable and the supporting documents, but in the same time the source files or the source code are all included in this folder src. So inside this folder you will see that there is a number of files which, as I mentioned, it's a combination of graphical user interface files that has an extension of .ml app and regular functions, MATLAB functions, that has a .m extension. So all these source code can be downloaded to your local computer or PC and can be modified accordingly. Of course, this is not the recommended way of doing things. It is recommended actually that any kind of modifications to the code, in order to be organized with the rest of the community, and so that we can trace any updates or any modifications by any other user to the actual code, that this need to be done through the GitHub or the Git platform. So essentially, if you are already familiar with GitHub or the Git platform, then that will become easy. Then you will need, of course, to take a copy of the repository and start modifying the code accordingly. Then you know the process. If you are not familiar with the platform, then I would recommend that you spend maybe a couple of hours or so to get yourself familiar with the procedure. Essentially, you will need to go to the GitHub, to the help page, and there is a quick start guide that essentially tells you how to get started quickly with GitHub. And what you will need is first to set up Git, which essentially you will need to download and install the latest version of Git on your computer. So this is this application that I have opened over here. So you can see it right here, and the current repository that I have it over here, it's EaRL. Right now I don't have any files that has been changed or anything, but this is something that you will learn later on. What does this mean? After this, you will need to set up a username, create an email address, and all the basic registration procedure. This is all for free. After that, you will need to do what's called fork a repo, and repo is a short for repository. And forking, meaning this is essentially this Git lingo means that you are going to take a copy of the online repository for a given project, in this case EaRL, and you will take this copy on your own machine through this app, so it will be stored on your local machine, and then you can freely experiment with any changes to the code without affecting, of course, the original source code online. And after doing this experimentation, once you start feeling comfortable with your modification, then you can submit these changes through the GitHub application. You can submit these changes to the actual or the main repository online, and whatever modifications that you made, it will be first vetted and validated by the authors before being incorporated into any new build or executable files in the future. Of course, credit will be given to the user or whoever modifies any given functionality or adds something new. So essentially, like the GitHub or applications, it's just a matter of simplifying the process of modifying the code and uploading it to the main cloud while keeping track of any updates and what kind of updates has been made and what lines of code has been added or removed and so on. So I would recommend that you go through this quick start guide in GitHub to get familiar with the whole platform for sharing software and developing software. There is also a number of YouTube videos and quick tutorials like within 1 hour to get started and to know all the basic terminology and things used in GitHub when sharing basic projects. Once you do that, then the next step would be to start modifying the code. And in order to do this, if you want to modify specific functionality in EaRL, so as we mentioned in the introduction video, there is multiple things going on in EaRL and multiple functionalities, and behind those there is a black box of series of functions that are being executed, and in order to modify or trying to investigate one of those functions and maybe check some of its procedures, then you will need to you need some kind of map that tells you, okay, where should you look, which functions should you look at, and what kind of variables are used in these functions, and so on. Because as we see here, there is like a very large number of functions and graphical user interface files, as well as other supporting files. So in order to understand the hierarchy or the code base of EaRL, what you can do is, like, from the main interface, by clicking on the developers button, which we went through very quickly in the introduction video, you will see that you will get this window over here, and essentially you have two tabs, one that says code hierarchy and the other one that says variables. And at the bottom of this window, you can see that there is like a black tip box that will show essentially any description of any selection that you do here. So first, under the code hierarchy tab, this one, it essentially tells you the code tree or the dependencies of all these files that are inside the source folder on GitHub. So at the root over here, you have the EaRL underscore app.ml app, which is the graphical user interface of EaRL's main console, which is essentially the window that we see right here. This is the main console of EaRL. So this is the root file actually. And if I expand this tree, you will see that underneath you have all these options or buttons essentially. So building data, this is the button over here for the building data, the population model, the hazard data, the component data, and so on. And under each of those, if I go to response data, for instance, so under response data, you will see that you will get the graphical user interface for the structure, response, definition options, which essentially, if I click on this one, so these are the options that you have here. You have 6 options. So actually, if you expand this in the code tree, you will see the 6 options that you have over here. And under each option, for instance, if I go to multi-stripe data or multi-degree of freedom shear model, for instance, then underneath this you will get the graphical user interface for the multi-degree of freedom shear model. So if you click next, this window over here, so this is the graphical user interface for the multi-degree of freedom shear model. And underneath this there is a number of functions, MATLAB functions, several of them, that each one of those that is being used to essentially run the model, plot the EDPs, and conduct all the different functionalities in this module. So assuming that by clicking on any function, you will see that you will get a description here of what the function does. You will also be given, you will also be told here in the description what kind of output variables are being produced by this function. And knowing this kind of data, like which function is dependent on which function and what kind of variables are being generated by each function, then you can get a sense of which function do you want to modify or edit, or maybe what kind of new function that you want to add and where it should be added, and so on. The same thing if you can keep going, if you're interested in the computation part. So this is the actual procedure that being used. So then you will need to go to the compute part. Under this, you go to the run loss code. So this is the main function that essentially branches out to the different codes or loss codes procedure that are being run. So the first one that you have here, this file, for instance, this function, this is the loss code main procedures. If you have a manual component definition, and if you're using the FEMA P58 methodology, so this is the main code procedures essentially. And underneath this, again, there is a number of functions. Each one, like the first one here, for instance, this one, check if the fragility data of the defined building components are correctly and fully specified. This one, for instance, it gets the realization EDP data using the random Monte Carlo process. This one gets the collapse loss at each realization, and it also tells you what kind of output variables are being produced, and so on and so on. So again, knowing this, then you can target a specific function and modify it from the source code. The variables used in each function, whether it's the output variables or even the variables used inside a given function, these are all actually described in this under this tab, which is called variables. And from this one, you can see here 3 columns. The first column has the name of the different variables used in EaRL. The second column is the type of the variable, whether it's a matrix, a string variable, a scalar variable, is it integer or double, so vector, and so on. And here you have the parent modules or functions where this specific variable is being used. And again, by clicking on any of those variables, you can see a full description of what this variable mean. And essentially, yeah, by knowing what a variable means and where it is used, and knowing the code hierarchy, using this combination of the two, it becomes much easier to modify the actual code and understand it much easier, and then of course it will consequently be simpler to modify the code. After the modification, again, we said that through the GitHub application, then this can be modified and submitted or committed to the main code, and it can be included into future versions of EaRL. So I hope this video has been clear enough regarding the process. The code, of course, and the developer interface that we have here, it will I will keep adding more details to it to become fully detailed and fully described. But at this stage, I believe it's very straightforward to understand the basic code. The code base of EaRL. It's well organized. The code is well organized, so it shouldn't be very complex to navigate through it and modify things. Hope that many of you will start playing with the code, experimenting with it, adding new functionalities and features, and sharing it with the rest of the civil engineering community.